Okay, let's take a little bit of time and introduce you to the star of the show, which is N8N. And even though I said JSON was before, as it was related to that part of the course, this course in its entirety is all about N8N. And let's look and see how the marketing positioning is done for N8N and how they say that you should use or think about N8N. So they really talk about front and center on their homepage. They're focused on IT ops. They're focused on security operations. They're focused on development operations, and then they're also using some sales use cases, and then they tell you to reach out to sales. They give you a little information. They show you some graphics. They have some nice logos. Obviously, there's lots and lots of data connectors to use with that. Anyway, you pretty much know what N8N is and isn't and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to give you my perspective on how I think you should think about N8N from a value and use case. And in all honesty, when you get ready to use it, you're going to use it in one of these 4 categories, okay? Of which the ones that they've identified would fall into those buckets. Okay, what can you do with N8N? The first and foremost option for you right now, and this is why N8N is so hot, is AI and chat. So you can do AI workflows and processing, or you could do traditional ones. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you could do just AI related stuff. Or you could throw a chat interface into the mix so that you can have users interact with the AI workflow on the back end. The other thing you can use it for is forms processing. Now, they may not be the best forms, but you can use the forms. They do have a use case. There are use cases where it's okay. They're quick wins. They're not pretty. You don't have a whole lot of styling control over them, although you do and can do some things with them, which again is okay. So there's use cases. There's another better way, which we'll get into as we get into this section. But nonetheless, the other thing you can do with it is workflow automations. This is traditional workflow processing. There's a plethora of things. If N8N, if this is all they did, then honestly, it's very similar to make.com. It's very similar to other type of things like Power Automate, although I am a huge proponent of Microsoft products for the years, and I will say that N8N blows Power Automate's ease and simplicity out of the water. To me, N8N is modern, sleek, fast. Power Automate, not so much. And while back in the day, Power Automate was a thing, I would now gravitate towards N8N any day to do what I need to do, either for a customer or as an employee or whatever it may do. The other thing that people don't often think of this, and this goes back to what I said, we'll get into it in a little bit. If you create a custom form in HTML JavaScript using vibe programming, you could use something like Windsurf, which now, as of the date of this recording, just a couple of days ago, OpenAI had purchased them. There's Cursor, there's a bunch of other things out there. What is it? Lovable. There's a handful of others that are out there. Bolt, and there's again just unlimited numbers of these things out there. The point is, you can make a form and you can connect it to the API where you can post the data from a custom beautiful form. You can use third-party apps like JotForm, or WordPress has WP Forms. You can have it from inside of WordPress. But as long as you can post it to an API, then you can use N8N to simply just not use the form capability. You just build an API to capture the information from the form. That being said, as you're creating these vibe programming tools, all of the back-end server-side logic, a lot of it, if not all of it, can be done in N8N, opening up huge possibilities of creativity based on what you can do with N8N. So those are the 4 use cases that I've identified for you. A little bit different in how N8N positions it, but nonetheless, we're going to dig into each one of these in this section of the course. Okay, let's dig in and see what you can actually do with N8N as it relates to both the AI and the chat. And if we pop open N8N, we're in a blank workflow. I called mine AI process. If you create a new workflow, it simply just says create new workflow. Let's not get hung up on this video with regards to how do I use and how do I do whatever. We'll circle back to all of that in just a little bit. But for right now, I just want to give you a little bit of primer. So let's go ahead and trigger this workflow manually. And so to set this up, the next thing that we want to do is we want to add one of these advanced AI items. And let's do a sentiment analysis. And we'll leave this blank for right now. And now we have one node connected to the other node, okay? So basically this is the input, this is the output, and if I open up a node, you see that you have inputs and outputs over here. That's just a primer to kind of give you a little orientation about how N8N works, but nonetheless, I'm going to show you how to insert a node right in the middle of this. And for this one, what I want to do is add a data transformation and specifically a set field. This is like a variable. We'll just call this one email. We'll keep it simple. Again, key value pair. Remember that from our earlier course. So the key here is, and I'll just call this one email letter. A little bit different so that we don't get hung up with just email. And then for the value, I'm going to pop over to my friend Poe. This is free to use. They also have a subscription, but I like it because I can just talk to it with a microphone and get stuff out. Give me an example email of a disgruntled or frustrated customer complaining about something that we've done wrong, and keep it somewhat short, but nonetheless accurate. Okay, so that's all I have to do, and I'm going to get an example email to our company. I'm just going to copy and paste all of this into this value string. Okay, so this is the body of that email, everything in that email. So here I have the email, And now I have this sentiment analysis AI, and it's going to detect if something is positive, if it's neutral or negative. And you see I have different pluses, which means for each version of the sentiment analysis, I can do something very specific with it. So this is something that's great if you have a shared mailbox or a dedicated mailbox for customer service, and you want to respond to negative feedback in a very particular way, or you want to provide a carbon copy to positive emails. Maybe this would go to a marketing department as well as some department that monitors inbound emails. But the point is, you'll have to connect it to an open source model. Now we have a plethora to choose from. I'm going to stick to the industry standard, which is right now the date of this recording, OpenAI, but you can also choose Ollama. You have Grok, you have a DeepSeek, AWS, there's Hugging Face, there's a bunch of stuff out there, including Azure. All of your major clouds are covered, including Google. I'm just going to stick to OpenAI because I have a key for it. We'll use GPT 4.0 Mini because it's fairly quick to use. And so with this being said, we'll go ahead and we'll save this. And now let's go ahead and run or test the workflow. Oops, there's a problem. And the reason there's a problem is because my text to analyze is blank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little play button, which allows me to start testing at this step. And the reason I want to test it is because I want to populate this text from the email that I put here. Remember I told you about inputs and outputs? Well, this is where it comes into play. Now, if we look at the JSON, we have a square bracket. Then we have a curly brace. So going back to the JSON training that we had showed earlier, this is an example of a zero-based index array because I have one record inside of this table. I got these curly brace here, and it says one item. Okay, so this one item, if I were to refer to this, it's zero based. I don't want to get into the weeds, but what I do want to show you is how simple it is when we leave it on schema. We can not have to understand anything about JSON, although, again, I wanted to give that to you so you understood what JSON is and how to use it, because if you come over here, you can see that. And in some cases, you will need to use it. But nonetheless, I'm going to grab the email letter. I'm going to drag it into the box and let go. And see that? It writes the code. It does the double braces. It pops it into an expression. Instead of it says email letter inside of the brackets, letting me know that this is what it's going to bring back. And lo and behold, I've got the text. So now that this is set up properly, I'll save it one more time, and we will run the executing of the workflow. Now I'm going to move this over, and I'm going to zoom in. Do you see the three branches? It has a checkbox next to this one instead of it up here or even up here. And the negative path is lit up, which means if we double click into it, we can see that the sentiment analysis, the category is in fact negative. And so if we look at sentiment categories, we have positive, neutral, negative, and I'll just call this one foo, just so that you can see that now there's a foo branch, which means we can train AI to do something completely and totally different than what it does out of the box. So here's the system prompt template for this particular one. And it says your highly intelligent and accurate sentiment analysis. Analyze sentiment of the following text and categorize it into one of the following categories. And see, it uses this reference of categories here. And so what that is referencing is this. And it's doing it in a dynamic way. And so that's what's really important to understand is when you see this is actually coming from JavaScript. And the reason for that is that it's like a token placeholder referring to something of what it is. Now, rather than using the full word sentiment categories, it just uses categories. But the good news is we can leave it just like this and know, because it's dynamic, that I've added foo to it, that I can do something different. So the point here is you have a lot of granular control over these types of things. Now, I've only dug into one use case of the advanced AI, and we use the sentiment analysis. A lot of times people will use this AI agent. Now this one's connected. I'm just going to tear it apart. And for the most part, it's the same thing where you have a model, but you also have memory and you have some tools. And we'll get into all of this stuff later in the course. But I did want to show you that this is one use case of using AI in a workflow scenario where this is being triggered. Now I could have this, the trigger could be an action in an app. And let's just look for Gmail. We'll use that. And let's see, I want to find when a message arrives. Add a label, mark. Label actions, draft actions, triggers. Here we go. On message received. So I could drag this out here to on message received. We could get rid of this. We don't need this anymore. And then we would wire this up to this. And then at this point, we'd have to provide credentials for Gmail, which I don't have. We'll get into all of that stuff a little bit later as well, so that we'll have a specific section under the user interface showing you how to connect to all of these different things. Because outside of here, if we go into the overview area, in addition to executions, you have credentials. And so credentialing this stuff is pretty straightforward for the most part. They got some really great documentation on this. And I'm going to show you how to connect to the most common ones, which is going to be Google. We're going to talk about the cloud on Azure. And for the most part, this will cover a good chunk of the use cases that more than likely everybody's going to run across when it comes to email. I'm not going to do AWS or Google on the cloud services as much until we get into the OAuth portions. But nonetheless, for the most part, everything's pretty straightforward. And we'll get into all of this a little bit later. All right, the last and final piece that I wanted to get into the weeds with you on is about creating a workflow. And this one's going to be the chat. So we're starting from a blank workflow. Again, it says my workflow. We could name it anything we want, but to do chat, we use on chat message. And we can turn this on and make this public. I'm not going to do that right now at this point. There's not much configuration, but I am going to need to choose an AI agent to deal with this chatting. So I haven't connected anything up, but I am going to come over here to chat models and come down here to OpenAI, and we'll leave it at GPT 4.0 mini, and we'll just leave it the basic and give it a couple seconds. It needs to validate that it can connect, and once it does, that error will go away. And now for the most part, I can open up the chat and I can say something like hello, and now this is a hi chat inside of the user interface of н8н. This is for you, the developer, developing this, and you can see and troubleshoot. And if you hover your mouse just carefully, you can reposition a lot of this. Also, you can push the space bar and hold it. See where my mouse is right now? If I push and hold the space bar, it allows me to grab the canvas and move it around. So that's very helpful too, for other reasons. But nonetheless, you can cycle through the different steps that things go through, and you can monitor how things fire in the proper order. This is really helpful for troubleshooting too. But nonetheless, this is how you would set up like a basic chat. And if you wanted to go live with it, you'd say make it public. And now it is public. We can grab the chat URL by simply clicking on it, which will copy it to the clipboard. And now I'll go ahead and I'll hit save, and I'll turn it from inactive to active so that this actually does work. We'll pop this URL into a new screen here, and now we have, hi there, my name is Nathan, how can I assist you today? And I just say hi again, and boom, it comes back. And now we have a chatbot. That quick, that fast, that easy. That's how hard it is to make a chatbot work with this. All right, so these are all of the basic framings. I know I went really quick. The video is a little long at 11 minutes for a video, but nonetheless, this should give you enough information to whet your palate, where you can go in and you can change a bunch of stuff. There's all these additional options that you can do to add to all of this. Just know that there is so much to cover in н8н in each one of these. We're going to get into the weeds on a lot of the nodes, where we're going to go into all of the operational ones from data transformation, flow, and core, because there is a lot of stuff there. The one thing that we're not going to cover is the 400 connection options to all of the different backends, because each one has a different use case. But by going through all of the basic nodes that are built into н8н, you're going to get used to a kind of a flow, and we will give a couple of examples of using some templates that's available on н8н to throw out a couple of different use cases, which will give you a lot of great rounded out information. All right, that's it for this video. We will see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Okay, now we're going to dig into the forums, and this is an area that is somewhat debatable on whether or not there is some use cases for it. The reason I say this is because 9 times out of 10, companies, even individuals running small businesses out of their home, they want forms that look good, or they want forms that can embed within their website to take on their branding. It's just natural for people to want to do that. And doing this with н8н without doing some trickery or some hoops is, well, not the easiest thing in the world. Hopefully they will fix this in the near future to allow forms to be embedded within sites using JavaScript embedding as opposed to iframes, because iframes get ugly. They don't do good for CSO. But in any event, I would suggest using things like JotForm or forms that you use in WordPress. And as long as they have the ability to post this form that you create or wherever it is to a webhook, then you're going to be fine. So with all of that disclaimer aside, oh, and then let me also add, now with the vibe programming like Cursor and Windsurf, you can create a really nice, sexy form with AI and then go in and tweak it with AI until your heart's content, and just do a simple HTTP post to your web form. And we'll get into all of that as far as APIs in just a little bit. Right now, this is about forms. So let's show you what you can do with forms. That's not to say that there's not a use case for it. So let's show you what they look like. So you click on Add Step, and then the first thing you're going to do is on form submission. All right, so now you get this test URL, you have a production URL. Now the only difference in this, I want you to take note of where this says test URL. It says form-test right here, whereas in the production, it just says form, okay? So it's pretty much the same string. And by the way, when we get into the administrative section, if you're wondering why, hey, you're on localhost up here, but down here you actually have a domain name. And the reason for this is that I've passed in a parameter of the environment variable. This one right here is actually running on Docker. Just a quick aside, you'll see that this is here. If I go into the container and we go into the inspect, and then I come over here to env, I'm using this webhook environment variable, and I'm specifying that this works. So just to demystify that in case people are getting distracted trying to figure out how this works, that's how it works, but we'll get into the weeds on all of that in the administrative section. Okay, so that being said, now you have the opportunity to provide, now this is cool. This is something that you will not necessarily be able to do in your regular forms with ease. You could do it with vibe programming with ease, but I don't think I've ever seen JotForm. In fact, there might be an option. I've never looked for it, to be honest, but They probably haven't. I've never seen it. But authentication is built into the N8N forms. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know that I have a use case for it, but if you did want to restrict form access to only people that you give credentials to, then that could be really good. That could also cut down on your spam too as well. You don't even need to worry about CAPTCHA images and all this other craziness to keep spam monkeys from, depositing a bunch of junk in your inbox. All right, so that being said, first thing we're going to do is give this a title. We'll just call this test title. That way we know it's a title. My DDS. Okay, we got my description. Okay, now the form elements are the forms on your screen. Now, earlier, in the preparatory course, we talked about data types. Well, this is where data types come in. See, it says element type, translation, data type. And so we have the typical suspects, including some new ones that we didn't talk about in the course. So you've got email. This is really good because it does email validation. This is allowing you to upload a file. This is a hidden field. You might include hidden fields in a form. So for example, if you were depositing this in a workflow to CRM, and one of the fields in the CRM is source, you could put source web, meaning web, or you could put the URL that it came from or whatever. The point is you don't want this field to show up on the form, but you do want it to be submitted behind the scenes to wherever you're writing this data to or including it in whatever email you want, blah, blah, blah. Here is your integer or number. This is a password field. This will allow you to type in some sort of text or alphanumeric characters into a field, and they will just show up as circles or asterisks. You won't be able to see what you're typing in. That is also a negative because modern day forms allow you to have like a little eyeball. It allows the user to reveal what it is that they're typing. It's not secure, but nonetheless, you can see what, especially for complicated passwords. And it will, anyway, it doesn't allow for you to do that. Here's the text. This is 9 times out of 10 what you're going to use for just regular old fields. If you have an area like a comment where you want people to type paragraphs of information, then you'll just do text area. So let's just do a couple of these. We'll do simple text. We'll just put name, and then we'll leave that one there. We'll add another one, and then you can toggle on whether or not it's required, and you can put Bob, right? This is just a placeholder for the form. Here's a field name. Instead of text, let's do number. Let's do age, placeholder 30. For whatever reason, we'll make this required. Anyway, this is good enough for now. Now, as soon as you click the test setup, you're going to get the form, and when you're in the test form, it'll tell you it's the test form. And so you can see the hint text there, but it's not there, as you can see, right? And so we'll do 55, and you can see this has a little pink asterisk or whatever it is, orange, right? And so you can fill this information in here, and then boom, you get the form submitted, yada, yada. Now, you may be wondering, how do you get rid of this form automated with? And the good news is you can. More often than not, there are a few exceptions to the rule where, especially for webhook confirmation forms and other things like that, I did find some fringe use cases where, unfortunately, you can't seem to get rid of the attribution, but they're few far in between. So what you do is come down here under options, this area down here in the bottom, and you click on add option, and you want to append the N8N attribution. By default, it's hidden, and by default, it's on, and I understand why they're doing it, especially for Community Edition. They want to get the word out. But you can disable it, and they were really kind enough to let you disable it, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Other companies try to say, hey, if you upgrade, we'll allow you to hide it. So anyway, now you can turn that off, and if we look at the form again, unfortunately, my modal window has disappeared on me. Let's try this again. Let me get out of here. Let's stop. Test the flow, here we go. And you'll notice that the N8N attribution is gone at the bottom of the form. So let's jump back in, and now let's take a look at some other options that are down here so that you can see. So adding form elements just adds more fields and forms to the screen. And then other options, you have a form path. This is helpful and not helpful at the same time. The reason I say not helpful, because anything that you do to the path, we'll just do foo, right? And so if we come up here to look at the URLs, that /foo is added to the end of that. And I found in certain use cases, it doesn't always come through. So just if you do add these suffixes or prefix, what do they call it, form paths, to make sure that you include this in any links. Otherwise, now if I take this test URL, let's throw this into mixed mode here. And if we do this head on, right, we get the form. But now if we forget to include the pathing, we will get an error. So just use it with caution. And if you do use it, remember that you used it. Otherwise, your forms will break in the event that you put these form paths, but unfortunately forget to include them in your URL links. All right, moving on. Form response. The form response is what you can show on the screen after somebody submits the form. You have a plethora of options, which is nice. You can show the form with the submitted text to show. Your response has been recorded. You can redirect them to a URL where whatever you conjure up inside of your mind's eye, you can do. And so those are your options with that particular response there. I'm going to get rid of append. I'm going to get rid of form path. Ignore bots. Let's see here. This will make it not available to search engines, if I remember correctly. Whether or not to ignore, from web crawlers, it basically just tells them don't crawl this form, which is probably something you want to do because it will pick up and then you'll find it and people will try to spam it. But if it's a contact us form, obviously you do want them to find that. All right, so moving on. Use workflow time zone. This is helpful when you are trying to use the N8N instance of the server as the date timestamp. So there's lots of areas. If I'm mistaken, I believe you can set this either at the workflow level. time zone. So I am into workflow. We haven't talked about this. We'll talk about this more in the user interface, but I'm into workflow. And these ellipses, 3 dots at the top right corner, just to the left of the star or GitHub star. Under the ellipsis is the menu for this, and you'll get settings. And one of the things you can do is set your default time zone in here. So that's what that is referring to in the form when you come down here to options of adding a time zone. And so if you use the workflow time zone, it's now going to bind the date timestamp that the form was submitted to whatever you have set in the settings. And so that's what that's for. The final option is custom form styling. Okay, so you should check the documentation for this. This is the default CSS styling, so if you want to change the color of a lot of this stuff. Now, typically what I do is I wind up using or changing this inside of Visual Studio, and if you change the values here, it will change the values in the form, and it will be much easier to look at it. So I'm going to select all, copy, and I'm going to load up or boot up here Visual Studio Code. Let's see if we can get this up and running. Let's do File, New Text File. We'll just pop this in here. Okay, and so now you can see that we can get to stuff a lot easier. So text notice, here is buttons. Let's see here, input label border, where's that hideous orange? Button background. Okay, so maybe you want to change it to purple or something. Let's see if I actually selected the right selector here. We'll go back to this. We'll paste that in. We'll hit test setup. Oh, there we go. Yep. See, now we got the purple button. So you can change the styling to some degree, but the problem is you're going to get this weird wonky URL that is a little bit different. You'll have form. It'll have the URL that you put in there, and then you'll get this really weird long GUID. Now, let me show you how to fix that or change that. Let's stop listening here. So if we come up here to the form, I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think you can change that GUID to it. Form title test. Yeah, unfortunately, you can only do this on a webhook, so I got a little confused here. I thought you could change that weird long GUID, but you cannot do that. That's another drawback of the form. If you're doing a webhook API, you can change the default GUID and override it to some plain text, making the URL a little bit shorter. So anyway, those are all of the drawbacks and positives for the web forms. And so when you're doing and using this node, now on form submission, you can simply, I'll just use a set command so that you can see what this looks like downstream. And let's do, I don't know, temp. We'll just leave the value like this for right now. Let's run this really quick. We'll do Sam. We'll do age 25. We'll hit submit. And now we'll go back into the edit fields. And now you can see that all of the form fields are available for you. So now if you wanted to just bring over the age of 25 and you wanted to call the variable temp, you could now do that. And then when that step flows, then that happens to do whatever you've gotten here. My point is you could write this to a SQL database. You could write this to a Google App Sheet. You could write, not App Sheet, Google Sheet. You could write it to an Excel file in OneDrive, blah, blah, blah. Send it in an email. You can process it any way you want. And so this is what forms are. This is how you'll set them up and use them and all of the different nuances of forms. So hopefully this is helpful to you and get you started really quick with n8n. This is a little bit longer of a video than I wanted, so we'll end it here and we'll see you in the next video. One other thing that I forgot to mention right before I closed out the video was respond when, and by default it's when the form is submitted, this does the response, but you do have the opportunity to let the workflow completely run and finish before submitting or showing or displaying that something has occurred with the form. So in certain use cases, maybe you want assurances that the flow ran, and if it did run, you'll send them, maybe you'll redirect them to a particular area, and if that's the case, then you'll simply just choose whatever path unfolds based on your preference. Otherwise, just know that if you're not worried about controlling the outcome of the flow based on how the flow unfolds and responding to the end user, just leave it at the default when the form is submitted, and then you'll get the most basic thank you, and then it'll go on and do its wonderful thing. And at that point, the end user will get redirected, but the workflow will continue to run until it's finished, for good, for bad, for error, for not. Okay, so that could be good or bad depending on how your acceptability of setting up the form is, but we'll leave it there for that feature. Everybody, welcome back. In this section, we're going to briefly touch base on workflows, which is the workhorse and the underlying main engine behind n8n. So before there was any other functionality, none of this would be possible without the ability for n8n to provide its rich workflow structure. So as you see, we have many options for you to choose from to trigger your workflows, from manually to using some type of trigger that might happen within an application to something on a schedule. The API webhook, we just covered the form submission. When executed by another workflow, in other words, this would be triggered off by a parent workflow. And in that use case, in and of itself, is huge. And then we showed you in the AI section a little bit about chat and chat messages and how that might be. And then, of course, these other ways that are other very specific use cases, more for fringe or use cases there. So I also want to use this as an opportunity to show you the rich templates that are available with N8N as an accelerator and a starter, and show you some cool user interfaces by jumping the gun on the video that we're going to do to kind of walk you through the user interface. We'll do a more comprehensive deep dive on this later. So if you're wondering why I skipped over some parts at some point, this is why. We're still in the introduction piece of it. And as you can tell, there's already so much to talk about. All right, let's go and click on this template in the lower left corner. And here we have categories of templates. You can also search for templates. Let's do a sales. Let's click on the sales category and let's see if we can find something fairly simple. Let's see here. Spreadsheet. Here's some manual code. Yeah, that's fine. We'll pick this. We won't be able to connect to everything, but in any event, we'll show it to you. All right, so when you find a template, a couple of different things to note. If you click on the Explore or click to Explore, you can also click Use for free. And here's some interesting things. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways of dealing with this. So you can just click this button, copy the JSON to your clipboard. Now I'm going to go pop back into Visual Studio Code because I want you to see what this looks like behind the scenes. And here I am showing you a bunch of, now I'm getting a bunch of weird squiggly lines because it doesn't really know that it's JSON because I haven't saved the file as a JSON file. But in any event, we covered JSON earlier. And so we can see that this entire file, it starts not with square brackets, so it's not a table of data. This entire file is a single record. And as you can see, this is an extreme large use case of JSON. And so this is JSON in the real world when you're wanting to use it, and the power and the flexibility and all your data types. Here's an example of an integer. Here's an example of a value. Here's your key. So we have the keys and values, and we got the text, we've got the brackets, everything we talked about before. Again, it's the same stuff, but if you were to open up this file without going through the beginning preparatory area of the course, you might be a little overwhelmed as to what in a God's green earth you're looking at. So this is why we took the time. Anyway, I digress, but I just wanted to show you what this cool file looks like behind the scenes. And then if we go into the workflow and we simply, I don't know, somehow I bailed out of that by accident. So now that we're on a blank canvas, which is, again, my workflow, all I have to do is I can right click and, well, usually you right click and you can do paste. So on my keyboard, I'm going to type Control V. If you're on a Mac, I think it's Command V. And if I do that, all of a sudden, magically, some nodes start to appear on my canvas. And that's because you can copy and paste JSON out. Let me show you just this. I'm going to highlight, sorry, let me try this again. I'm going to highlight over this one node, and I'm going to do Control C on my keyboard. And you see down here in the bottom, it says copy to clipboard. I'm going to pop back over. This time I'm going to go into Notepad. This way it's a little bit easier to deal with. And so I'm going to paste this in here. Now you'll notice that the code that I pasted is not that much. It's just this, as opposed to what it was before. And so the node representation of that in JSON looks exactly like this. This is all of the parameters for configuring this one node. The reason I'm showing you this is that as you unfold and do different things, you might have two different screens open. So for example, let me go back to the localhost version of this. And I don't know, we'll go to personal, we'll create workflow, and now I'm gonna hit paste. See, I can paste, copy and paste, and interchangeably move nodes from one tab to another tab. And so this is so powerful because you can move things around, manipulate things, steal from parts of one workflow, build them with other parts, and just start like Lego kits. Then when you bring them in from other areas, just wire them up. Obviously, you'll need to solve any of these errors or issues or connectivity problems. But my point here is that it is super powerful to just use templates and workflows in N8N by copying and pasting either holistically the entire workflow, as you saw what I did here, you can click into the workflow, and then on the template, you don't have to download it. You can just interact on the help of the template file, seeing how this is configured, seeing what looks like under the hood. So here you can actually get to the code. It's a little hard to read in some of these situations. You might have to finicky or fiddle with your browser because of the way that it's embedded. But nonetheless, now I can see the code example of how this particular code node is working. This is JavaScript. And so this is really, really cool. So anyway, I'm going to leave it here. This is templates, this is workflows, and this is the engine that drives everything and makes it possible. And a workflow is literally nothing more than a bunch of steps. Now, this is a very simple use case. I could disconnect the node here, and I could disconnect the node here, and I might come off of here. And anyway, the point is you can configure these nodes in one of many different crazy configurations. What I did here is not going to work. It's functionally poor. It's not, don't take regards to what I just did. There are special nodes that allow you to do what I'm doing here, but I'm just trying to illustrate the point is that a workflow isn't just step A, step B, step C. You can have all of this craziness in the middle of this, and some of these can get actually quite crazy, to be honest with you. if you give me just a second, I'm going to go and copy out something else and show you an example of what that might look like. All right, I am going to wipe all of this out and get ready. I'm going to paste this in. Okay, here is a example of something absolutely crazy and gnarly. Okay, so this is a workflow that has a bunch of stuff going on in parallel, and within and of itself, it's got a bunch of things going. Now, this is quite linear, but we're moving through it, and we've got all of the normal suspects, but here's and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so don't freak out. We're probably not going to build anything as complicated as this, or maybe we can, but the pieces to this is exactly what we're going to get into, so you know how to build stuff like this. This is the difference between this course and other courses. So here we just have a simple if node, and if something is going to happen a certain way, we do nothing if it's false. If it's true, then what we're going to do is we're going to take a list of items and we're going to loop over them. And then we're going to go down all these steps. And then when we get to the end of this, if we get an error, we're going to come loop around and do the next item. And if we don't get an error, then we're going to go out and we're going to do this other particular thing that's going on here. And let me grab this so that I can come over here. And then we write it to a Google Sheet. And then I come back to the end and I re-invoke the loop one more time. This is part of the problem when you get a gnarly workflow. Anyway, we're coming out of this last node, and we're circling all the way back around to hit the next loop. So we come into a loop, excuse me, sorry, and we do this twice in the loop. So in one condition, we go to a loop if we get an error. To another condition, we go to a different version of the loop in different phases or different parts. So this is a great example of a more complicated workflow. And then if we simply just look at some of these like this, and we just click into this type of workflow, and we click to explore, we can see there's only a handful of nodes. So this is much more simple than something crazy and gnarly like this. All right, we'll leave it here, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the API and back-end section of what you can do with N8N, and as we're rounding out this section, this is one of the more powerful areas because all too often we think of N8N as a workflow automation tool. Obviously, you have the capabilities of doing traditional workflows, but now with the inclusion of AI and agentic AI workflows, that really takes things to the next level. However, another use case that I would like you to consider is webhooks and APIs kind of being one and the same thing. So let's start with an empty workflow, and let's kind of talk through this. So if we come over here to add a first step and we click on the little box, and then we come over here to pick over on this on webhook call item. A webhook, let's define terms here. So a webhook is a endpoint on the internet that basically you reach, and as soon as you do it, or it's called, it gets started or it invokes some sort of an action. And that action is determined by you, depending on how you structure the workflow. Now, the webhook can take in optional parameters, meaning you can insert data or send data along to the ride. For the ride, it's called a payload. Multiple ways of doing it. You can do it in a traditional API like post in a body. You can do query parameters. These are the little type of question marks. You can see an example of this right here in this URL. Here's an example of project ID being a query parameter, and its value is equal to this up here. And so in any event, you have lots of different ways of dealing with that. Now, webhooks typically provide functionality for one type of workflow, and it does whatever it's supposed to do, and it moves on. An API is a collection of these webhooks. They're essentially just called endpoints. And in an API, you have like a full schema, a full kind of a full path of what its capabilities are, what it can do, what it can't do, yada, yada, and so on. And the first couple of configurations, you can see there's a test URL, here's a production URL. We got this really long GUID, and if I just do н8н and leave it at that, it gets rid of that long URL and makes it pretty unique. Now, I don't suggest putting н8н in here. I just did that to show you that it can get shorter. But the point here is this URL becomes the endpoint URL that you will use in your webhook, or if you want to call it an endpoint, or if you want to call it an endpoint within your API. You can add multiples of these, by the way. So I can do Control-C, Control-V, Control-V, right? Now I have in one н8н file, I have 3 endpoints. Now this is an API for sure, because I have one workflow acting with 3 different triggers, and each of the 3 triggers can have different URL endpoints. And so they're all located on the same system or within the same workflow. And so I think this is 99, and then this one was, I think I did 88, and then the other bottom one is 77. Now, that's all well and good and fine. It doesn't make sense in this context, but just letting you know that you can have multiples of these in one file, and that one file can be configured and set up as an API. So let's look and see how you might do some of this. Again, webhooks are very, very simple. So if you're used to webhooks, then nothing different has changed there. I'm going to set this up in such a way to where it will take any base knowledge that you may have in that area if you understand webhooks. Otherwise, I'm going to have you think about this in terms that will give you future understanding and future growth to get the most out of this feature. Okay, so We'll come back to the URL get in production in a little bit. Let's talk about this HTTP method. So when we start talking about webhooks, typically we're going to deal with only get, and we're only going to deal with potentially post for webhooks. And this is going to be true even of APIs, like 80, maybe even as high as 90% of the time. These other methods are not used as much. The one that I've never used is the head method. I've not used put. I have used patch and post and get and delete, but I've not used put, but I know what it is and does. And so basically, when you're dealing with something behind the scenes, such as data in a database, typically applications need to have the ability to create, update, and delete. That acronym together is called CRUD, for CR for create, U for update, D for delete. And it just means that, if you think about any app that you've used on your phone or any application you've used at any point in time, typically you're creating information, you're deleting and updating information. And so that's why this back-end development API or webhooks exists, to do that very thing. Now, in the context of a workflow, get might be all you need to do, because you simply just need to kick this thing off and it does whatever it needs to do. And you can also pass along some parameters to go along for the ride. So in this instance, I'm going to show you an example of get. And for the path, let's do something called V1. It's an acronym for version 1. And I'm just going to call this one get records, RECORDS, easy to talk and type at the same time, and I still mistyped it. In any event, okay, so the pathing here, what this is this is the unique ID for this particular workflow. So I can't have another workflow on this URL on the server with the same name, otherwise it'll cause a conflict. However, that being said, I can do this version 1, and then I can call it, get records, and I can make it even more unique or distinct if I wanted to. But for right now, I don't have anything else here. I'm fine. But just know that this does have to be unique. So even if you need to serialize it with a dash, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, whatever, you can do that too as well. Anyway, so moving on, I'm going to leave the authentication blank. So you can lock this down with the authentication, and we'll come back to that, and we'll show you that in a little bit. Respond immediately is good if all you're doing is you're basically pinging that URL in some app or in some other automation or for whatever reason, and that's all it needs to do. You don't need to capture a response. You don't need to do anything. All you're going to get is, hey, the workflow is kicked off and we're good to go. And I'll show you an example of that right now. So I'm going to grab the production URL because it's a little easier to work with than the test. And we'll show you a couple, actually both use cases. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to activate it. And now I'm going to take that URL and I'm going to hit it. And now I get the message, workflow was started. That's it, right? And it's because it's responding immediately. It's not providing any return values. We're not getting any data back. But now we're going to set it up so that we do get some data back, okay? So let's look and see how we can do that. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to pop open a Google Sheet. I'm going to go get my other test account going here, and we're going to go to Google Sheets. I'm going to show you this API sheet. It's pretty simple. So the name of the spreadsheet or file is called API Sheet. And then you can have multiple tabs or sheets within a file, right? And so this is sheet number 2. Then we have demo sheet here. Nothing on sheet 2, but on demo sheet we have about 50 rows of data. It says 51, but the first row is column headers. So we have 50 records. And so we'll set this workflow up to go get Google Sheet information. So we'll just type sheet, and here we can see Google Sheets, and that's what we want. Now what I want to do is I want to bring back rows from that file, that spreadsheet. So I'm going to choose get rows. And now I've already have an authentication. Now later in this course, we'll show you about authentication into Google using OAuth. It's a little bit complicated. Once you get the hang of it, it's not that bad. Microsoft is another one for using the Entra ID and the app registrations. That's somewhat of a pain in the neck. But once you know, it's pretty much easy and it's not so hard. So I'll show you each of those later in the course. For right now, just accept it. I've already configured this. This is working. There's some magic that needs to happen when you set that up. So I'm going to connect now. I'm getting the rows. That's the operation. Now see, I can choose all of these additional operations, but you'll notice that these are very, very similar to the operations that I could have chose when I went. So I choose Google Sheets and see these sheets with document actions, 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. All of those options, you can choose any of them. And if you accidentally choose the wrong one, you can go into this operation and just pick the right one here. It's really the same node, but depending on how you choose the operation, it becomes one of those many, many operations that you can do. But right now, all we want to do is just get rows, get data. Now I have to choose the file. And so the file, as you remember, was called API Sheet. And I added 2 sheets, the second one that you saw me add live, but the data is on demo sheet. So I'm going to choose that. And at this point, that is good to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now watch what happens. You think I'm going to get data back, but I'm not. I'm actually just going to get the same thing again. So I did get the same thing. And if I look over here at executions, you can see I have this execution and I have this new execution. And if I go into it, I can see that there was data on the right side. And I'll get into this more a little bit later, but when you're dealing with nodes such as these, or any node, not the trigger, which in this use case was the webhook, but when we're dealing with the nodes, this is the Google Sheet node, you have this concept on the left side of things called input, and on the right side, these are things called output, and in the middle is the configuration of the current node in which you are on. Now, not to confuse things, but there is a way to navigate to the node to the left and a node to the right. don't have anything to the right now, but I do have a webhook to the beginning. And in this more drilled in interface, you can switch between nodes by going to the extreme left or to the extreme right to move along the path where you can just go back to the canvas and click on a node to get into whatever. Now I'm in the executions mode right now, so I'm seeing all of these. And up here is this editor where I'm clicking the tab between editor and executions. And the good thing is, or the interesting thing is, you can pin information, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll cover all of this later. But what I want to show you is how to return the data that came from the execution of this node. So in order to do that, we need to be able to develop some stuff and be able to see it so that we can deal with it. And this is where we have to use the test workflow action. So I'm going to go and double click into here, and on the webhook URLs, it defaults to test. So if you click on it, just click on the field. You see where it says click to copy? You click it, and down here it says the URL is copied. All right, so it is copied to the clipboard. And if I go ahead and I paste this into the URL, I get this error message, and it says it's not registered. Well, it is registered, but what it really is trying to say is it's not listening. You don't have it into test mode. So in order to do that, you have to click listen for this test event, or you could click on test workflow. In any event, I'm going to go into here. I'm going to choose listen for event. You can also then get this, and you can copy it out again. So I'll copy it. Actually, I don't even have to copy it. I'm just going to hit refresh. There we go. Workflow started. Okay, now it's working. But if we go back to the other tab where we actually clicked it and tested it, now we go back to the canvas, we see there's a green checkbox, but on the right side, more importantly, output is no longer blank. I do have output. And this is helpful because now when I go into the Google node, this is how I get access to the input data so that I can do something with it. In this use case, I don't need to do anything with it, but I do want to see what's going on downstream. And I'm going to need to do that. So once again, I'm going to click the play on this to test it. And so all it does is go out to get that data, and now we have output in the output side, and that's ready to go. And that's important because the next step, the final step, what we want to do is add this respond to webhook, and we're going to put that, and it's automatically connected up to the Google Sheets, right? See, it is connected, and you see that now I have 50 items every time I hover over it, right in this area. I have 50 items that's going into the respond to webhook. So now if I click this, I can see a couple of things. I'm going to collapse this down. It's a lot easier to show when it's collapsed. See, I have Google Sheets, and see, I have webhook, and then I have variables and context. This is showing me all of the things that came before, all of the things I can choose while configuring this particular node. Now, it says respond with first incoming item. Now, the incoming item in this use case, if I go back to Google Sheets, the first incoming is customer ID 1, this John Doe on this date. If we slide over, there's no more data, but it's row number 2, customer ID 1, blah, 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 blah. We go back over to the respond to webhook. If I click test setup, I get all of this data, but because this defaults to respond to first incoming item, watch what's going to happen now when I get this information. And a precursor, it's not going to still give us what we expect, and I'll show you why that's happening. So you need to make sure that when you make these changes to your workflow, before you retest it, you want to save it. And I'm going to show you, I'm doing these errors on purpose so that the expected output that you think you're going to get and you don't get, I want to show you how this breaks down and why you don't always get what you think you're going to get. And through this troubleshooting process, hopefully you'll understand where to go and where to look to try to figure out, hey, did I miss a step here or there or wherever? Okay, anyway, so I think I have this configured correctly, which again, we don't. I'm going to go ahead and throw this into test mode again. And now it says waiting for you to call the test URL. So I'm going to click it again. And now I have message workflow webhook error. The web flow could not be started. Interesting. Why is that? All right. The reason for this is because there is a respond to webhook node here, but the configuration of this is wrong. And you can see that it's wrong because the webhook node is not configured. Set the respond parameter to using respond to webhook node. Okay, the plain English is saying that when you have one of these connected to your flow in series, this has to be configured in such a way to where this respond piece right here needs to be chosen using respond to webhook node. Okay, now this is wired up correctly, and we will get a response, but we're still not going to get what we expect to see, because if what you're expecting to see, and by the way, make sure you click save because I made a change. If you're expecting to see all of the rows returned, we're not. We're only going to get the first row. And why? Because respond with first incoming, and that's why. So again, if your expectation is that you're going to see this respond with all of the rows, and I'll make it more print pretty, we're only getting the first row. And you're like getting frustrated because you're like, oh my God, where's the rest of my data? And so go here. If you think you're going to get all of this, then you just need to change it to all incoming items. I made a change, come back out, click save, and now when we hit the refresh, okay, that's not what I was expecting. What do we got here? All incoming items. This, to me, looks good, so let's rerun this. Hit save. 404, request not registered. Okay, test workflow. Yep, see, this is where I get spun around, sorry. When you do test it, you have to put it into test mode. See, I told you, even I get bit by it. I told you I was gonna get bit by it, and I did. All right, so now we're getting all 50 rows, and if I make this look more like traditional formatted JSON, we can see that we have all 50 rows and we have all of the data, okay? So all of that just to show you a simple 3-node thing, but the point here is that now we have an endpoint with this. Now we could go ahead and do a bunch of other things like add records and do whatever, and you can do that on your own. I will show you something right here. I will copy this, I will paste this, and we will change this around a little bit. Let's go into this. Let's change it to get to post. Let's do instead of get records, we're going to do add record, not plural. We're going to add a record. So we'll leave it like that. And so now we'll hit save. And here under the sheet operation, instead of get rows, we want to add a row, append or update a row. Let's see here, append a row, create a new row in a sheet. That's the one that we want. And now we have to give it data. Now I'm going to hard code this to just illustrate this. I'll show you how to make it dynamic in just a second. 995555551212. Email is test@test.com. And the last data purchase, 04/22/2025, which is the date of this recording. And we'll click out of here. We'll do save. Let's get this test URL. Okay, let's test the workflow. Okay, now we're waiting. Now both of these webhook and webhook 1 are listening for an event. I am going to move this over to this side. I am going to tear out this tab and put it over here. So we can try to see a couple of things happening at the same time. I'm going to change this out and I'm going to paste in the new URL. And you can see up here, I have the add record. Now when I click enter in this URL bar, I want you to notice the second one, or the one on the bottom. We should start seeing green arrows or green things all the way down. And the problem is I'm not 100% sure that this is going to give us everything that we're looking for, but let's just see how it works. Let me come up here and hit enter. And we got the webhook is not registered for the GET request. Okay, it needs to be a post. All right, so to illustrate this, we're going to do something else. I'm going to close this one down. I'm going to bring up my good trusty friend Postman, which Postman allows us to test APIs and set everything up the way that we want to do it. So within Postman, I'm going to come here and I have a blank workspace, and I have this collection that's empty called class, and I'm going to add a request under the ellipsis. Okay, now remember, we need to do a post, so we're going to change this to post. I'm going to put the URL in here like this, and now I'm going to switch this over to the side. And so because of this, I'm not having to do any funny business. I'm not needing to add anything, but I am using a proper testing tool. And I will caveat this. I have Postman installed locally on my machine, which means that because it's installed locally, I need it installed locally to access the local host on my machine. Because when you sign up for Postman, not only do you get access to the desktop app if you so optionally choose to install it, but you can do all of this in the browser. They give you the same interface. And a lot of times people do use that. And they don't even know that you can do this on the desktop. I'm telling you, in this use case, you need to use the desktop because you're dealing with localhost. And so if you try to write something into localhost, this is a problem. Now, you'll notice that my URL has a public domain name. And that's because when I set up н8n in Docker, I gave it a optional environmental parameter called webhook_URL. And I named it specifically so it does work. So in my use case, I could do this locally as well as do it on the internet, and both would work for me, but you might not have that configured, which means you're going to have to try to use this or test it locally using some kind of local tool so that you can get to the н8n local host web server where it's running on this port. Mine is 8990. I forget what the default port that н8n runs on. So if you haven't changed it, it'll be running on the default port. Okay, that being said, I'm going to invoke this now. Now I'm sitting here and it says the requested webhook record is not registered. And that's because I didn't put this into test mode. We'll put it in test mode, and now all of a sudden we see it. And look at that. Lo and behold, we have the data that was inserted into the record, and that data is coming from the data that we had configured. Let me go back to full screen. This is coming from the data that we statically put into here, okay? And so now we could change this around so that we can now add data to the webhook. And as a result of this, we'll have a fully operational function to do this, because we don't want to have this hard-coded. It's kind of bad. So let's look at this. We need customer ID and phone number, so let's start there. Let's come over to the webhook, and now what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some options here. One of the things that we can do is add some query parameters, and to do that, I want to, actually I don't even need to configure that here. I thought I had to configure the query parameters. So I don't. I can just pass them in and we'll grab them. All right, so with that being said, let's come over to here. I'm in Postman now. So this might get a little bit funky for you, especially if you're not used to APIs, but just know that I want you to keep your eye on the ball of the money, okay? That's this thing at the top. We are going to add something called query parameters, and watch how the syntax changes. But the reason that Postman would be good, because it's also kind of a low-code, no-code tool, in that we can start adding these key values. Again, going back to the earlier lessons, a key value. We need to add these in here as they exist. So I'm going to go over and pull open the Google Sheet again and change the account. Let's go back to Google Sheets because we need to use the exact column names. And if we don't, get this right, this will be a problem. So I'm going to grab customer ID, and then I'm also going to grab the phone number. So these are the names of the columns. Just like as we showed you in the earlier training, the keys and the values. We'll provide the values in just a minute. And somehow I got all spun around again, and this is the last date of purchase. Okay, so I told you, keep an eye up here. So watch what we've got here. After the add record method that we named in the N8N workflow, let's go back to that in just a second here. So you can see that in the naming, right here in the path, that's what we have here, the add record, okay? So that's part of the method pathing. Then all of a sudden we have this question mark, and you always have the first query parameter start with a question mark, and every subsequent one, if you have them, will need to have this ampersand or @ symbol included between your keys, okay? Now notice I don't have any values, so there's supposed to be equal and then some value. So instead of customer 99, we're gonna do customer 100, we're gonna do 111, 111, 5555, and email, hello@test.com. And now we got last date of purchase. We'll do last year of 4/22/2026. We'll go a year in the future. Okay, sounds a little crazy, but nonetheless we can do it. All right, now look at what we've got up here at the top. We have &phone equals, and then we've got these weird dashes in between, but that's because I put them there. And we don't have any spaces in any of our values, so that is good. So if I did have spaces in my phone number, watch what would happen. The spaces stay there. Now, in some use cases, this could be a problem. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because somebody out there is going to run into this, and then they're going to be like, dude, it's not working, and blah, 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 blah. The reason that these spaces don't work is you're going to have to, in some use cases, do something that's called URL encoding. To URL encode a space, you simply add this %20, and that is the URL encoded version of a space. Another way that you could handle this a lot more eloquently or in a low-code way, you can just go to your friendly Google and ask for encryption, decryption, online, URL encoded. And then you'll get to this URL encode. And if I do 111 space 111 space 1111, or I think I had all fives, 5555, right? And all of a sudden I say encode, you see, I get this %20 down here, I get the %20 down there. You don't have to know that. You can just go to tools like this on the web, pop it in there, it'll take care of your ugly formatting or something with a formatting, and it'll properly URL encode. There are functions in programming languages to do this for you as well. Anyway, I've completely digressed. Hopefully you didn't get too spun around or lost. In any event, so we got this long URL that's ready to go. I'm gonna go ahead and save this off to make sure that it works the way that we expect it to. And I'm gonna back out of this. Now this time, I am going to have the workflow in testing mode, but what's gonna happen is I'm gonna get a duplicate entry here. Let's just not add all of this. And at this point, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to stop the workflow test, and I'm specifically going to go into this node, and I'm going to do listen for event. Now, there's a reason why I'm doing it this way. I don't want to invoke the whole workflow. I just need to work on this node to capture some data so that I can see what it looks like, so I can handle it in a low-code, no-code way. And so when I post that, now I got this information posted, but it didn't go through the entire workflow. It just went here and stopped. Now it's in a way that I can use the output of this one item in this, and this allows me to configure it. Okay, so here's the webhook. The headers is something that comes along in the request, and so we can ignore that and collapse them down. What we do want to get to is the query parameters that we provided values for. So now all we need to do is simply drag customer ID to customer ID, and look, it writes the code for you, but not only that, in the result underneath it, it gives you a preview of what that value is. That lets you know that everything's good. Number one, it's green, so if it's bad, I'll put a period here, and all of a sudden you got invalid syntax, or it'll be red, and let you know that there's a problem. So now we just do the same for phone number, and we do the same for email, and we do the same for last date of purchase. And lo and behold, everything's configured up correctly, and if I hit test, I got the row coming through the way it needs to be, and now it has written that information into the sheet. And if we come all the way down, we now have rows being written outside of the table, and I have this formatted as a table. So for table formatting, let's see, is there just a way to revert this so that I don't have to have it as a table anymore? I guess it's going to stay as a table. All right, anyway, so we'll just leave it like that. Okay, and so now all of this worked well and good, but I've deleted the rows out of the sheet. This is now completely working. I'm going to go over here and grab the production URL, which is now copied. This is active, and I'm going to hit save. Now I'm going to go back over to Postman, and at this point, we're no longer going to see things happen, but I'm going to come over to the executions tab, and you should see a new execution pop up. Now notice the most recent one was run at 13:05, and we're like at 13:06 right now. I'm going to remember to change out this URL with the new production URL, and I'm going to save my Postman file. So now I'm going to post the same information again. And there comes the new one. You can see the execution happened. If we click into the execution, we can see that the webhook went, we can see the Google Sheet went, and we can see the respond went. And we can see what the response is. in JSON. We get nothing. There's no response, and that's kind of ugly. So, you know, you might want to change that a little bit, and you can definitely do that. And so here in the editor mode, respond to webhook, instead of all incoming items, we're just going to put JSON, and then we can simply format out whatever we want to do. And we can just say message, the record, and we'll do the record. We're making this essentially dynamic. So let me grab this out of here. The record number, blah, and let's not have a space. We need a space here, was added. Okay, so that was all well and good and done. We'll hit save one more time. Let's jump back over to Postman, and we'll go one more time. And now you can see we got a nice proper response that we can capture and get a hold of, okay? So this video has gotten quite long, and we're gonna go one more step, and it's pretty quick. And now what we're gonna do is we're going to go back to the workflow, and I told you that we were gonna secure this down. So let's go to this first one, the get information, and authentication, let's choose basic. And right now we're gonna select a credential. There are no credentials to select. We're gonna create new. Again, this is the same thing, key value, key value. So we're gonna give this a name. We'll call this one my-API-key. I'm going to copy that off. We're going to do password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, make it super secure, and we'll save. And now we'll close. And instead of this saying unnamed credential, let's go back one more time. Let me get rid of this. And let's change this to something helpful. And we'll change the name to the key so that it's one and the same. We'll maybe just postfix that with name so we know that it's the name and not the actual key. All right, so now we have my API key name, which is going to use those credentials. And that's all well and good. Let's go to the webhook. Do the same thing. Now all we have to do is choose basic auth, and the key is already created, so we don't have to do it. And so now we are able to click save, and now watch what happens when I go into Postman. And I try to make that same post again. Instead of getting it, I'm going to get unauthorized. Okay, so here we are. It's unauthorized, and this is a problem because I need to provide some authorization. So I come over here in Postman under authorization, and I can choose basic auth, and I'm going to put my API key, and I think I did 1, 2, 3, 4, so hopefully that works good. And we'll hit send. And it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, was it? I don't remember what I put in. I can't remember. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is there. Now I got a 200, and now I get this, that the record number was added successfully, and I don't think the record actually went in. I do think that there was possibly a problem with the execution. Let's look at the last one. Let's see what it wrote. Yeah, so it's the item is empty because it saw essentially a conflict there. So anyway, this video is long enough. That's how you secure your APIs and your API keys, and how you'll be able to use Postman to configure all of this, add security. The only last piece that I will add to you is that you can even secure this further. There are a bunch of available options that's here. I want to bring your attention to this one right here, IP whitelist. This is one that can really enhance your security. So if you have a single system with a static IP always accessing this, to lock it down further, specify its IP address. That means only that computer on that IP address using this API key, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, will be able to access this. So you've got two methods or two layers of authentication. And again, there's all these other types. You got header, JSON web tokens, and then none. If you have more advanced needs like OAuth and things of that nature, then н8н isn't going to be the right API backend platform for you, but it is a fantastic single endpoint webhook. Just wanted to show you in a very unfortunate long video how and why webhooks are so possible to do backend development for your applications. Hope this was clear. Hope this was helpful. Again, pause, rewind, do whatever you need to do. Apologies for the really long video. We'll try to keep the rest of them a little bit shorter. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, welcome to this video, and I'm not sure that this video is going to be for everyone, because if you're familiar with н8n's interface, then you can probably skip this. I am going to do a thorough job, or almost thorough job, of covering just about everything I can think of to give you, so this might be on the longer video side. It's not super exciting, but if you're brand new, I do suggest that you watch it, because at least it'll give you some ideas as to the capabilities. I'll try to go as quick as I can and not spend and over-embellish too much in any one area. All right, so that being said, I'm going to come from the Google homepage, and I am going to pop in the URL to н8n, because I want to show you where you land as soon as you get in. Now, I've already authenticated, so I'm already in, so it's no big deal. But you do land in the overview area. If for whatever reason this side menu is collapsed, there's a tiny little, and I'm going to move my cursor around, there's a tiny little arrow that allows you to collapse and expand the left sidebar. Okay, so when it's collapsed, you can't see the labels. When it is uncollapsed or opened, you can see the labels. However, you can hover over any one of the icons, and if you give it just a second, it will give you the label as to what that is. So I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not to twirl that open. As of the date of this recording, I want to show you the version so that at least you'll have some understanding what this is. As of 189.2, they're working on 1.90, I believe now. But in any event, as of the date of this recording, this is what the UI looks like. Okay, that being said, let me go ahead and refresh this so I can collapse everything out. I have a bunch of workflows that are on and that are off. I also have under personal is where you can get into and start using folders. Okay, so folders is over here on the top right side. And as of now, folders are available in your personal space. And you get the personal space by coming over to personal, and then you can start organizing the flows into other areas. Now, this is the community edition. I'm not sure how this works differently in a paid version or in the public version that you subscribe to in the cloud from н8н directly. This may be different. Personally, it's of my opinion, I hope that at least there's the ability to share personal folders and views, and there's at the administrative level some way of structuring this, because if everything is just one huge pile, and if you're in an enterprise situation, that could get really gnarly quick. So if there's no administrative way to structure this to some way, obviously that comes with a caveat of additional problems or feature requests where they're going to want to put security on the folders, and anyway, it's going to turn into pretty much a full-blown nightmare with that. But in any event, not sure how all that works. I'll leave it there and we'll see how that pans out. If you're on cloud, maybe you can put a comment in the comment box to let us know what that experience is as of the date of when you watch the video. That would also be helpful for other folks. And to move along, in either of these tabs, again, you create your personal folders here. I'm going to go ahead and create a quick workflow. I'm going to save it. It's going to be empty. Don't really care. But I want to show you that you cannot grab an item and drag and drop it into a folder. You literally will have to go to the right, left ellipsis, vertical ellipsis, and choose Move to Folder. Now inside of this н8н, the Ultimate Course folder, I have subfolders. And just to illustrate this point, when I want to move it into, say, the administration folder, I have to know that I want to move it into the administration folder. So you have to start typing, and then you get a suggested list. So if you want to just plunder around to figure out where you want to put it, you need to know this before you start this process, because this process is not going to help you figure it out. You're not going to get a tree view. You're not going to get anything expandable. You simply just need to know where you want to put it, select the folder, and then click Move into Folder. Not that big of a deal. It's functional, but maybe a little latent into some of the more modern interfaces that allow dragging and dropping of information. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to get rid of this. We'll delete this out here. And then again, if you want to create your folders, you create them here. We put blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, if I want to move this folder into a subfolder or subfolder, I'll need to go through the same process again and choose my folder that I want to move the folder into. So it's kind of a multi-step process. It would be nice if there was an extra item here to where you could both create and choose the destination at the same time. But as of, again, the date of the recording, that doesn't exist either just yet. Okay, so that being said, let's move along into the next window. So here we got the button at the top that says Create Workflow. Notice the little drop-down arrow. So we have these other options here. And the reason I'm showing it so that we can finish this up is that there's the ability to create a folder as long as you're in the personal section. So if I click this and I'm in the overview, magically, contextually, I do not see the ability to create a folder because contextually I'm in the overview, not the personal view. Now, I have a pet peeve. I'll also share this as of the date of the recording for this. If I click into the credentials area, this is where I list out all my credentials. Contextually, I would have a preference to see the Create Credential button. Instead, I have to still choose the drop-down and choose Create Credential. So to avoid clicks, if you know you need to create credential, save yourself a click. You don't need to click here first to create the credential. You can just stay in workflow because you're still going to have to come to here and choose Create Credential. Anyway, this is the same use case when I'm over here as well. Create Credentials is available as a drop-down. Contextually, I'm still having to click it. So again, the key takeaway is if you know you need to create a credential, just go from the button, choose Create Credential. That might change in the future too as well. Okay, that being said, that should cover most of the stuff here. Executions, I'm going to cover very briefly. These are the executions when you contextually go to executions here, like this. You're seeing this at the server level, or you're seeing this at the area of the workflows that you have access to. And so if you're needing to find a particular access or execution for this, you could use the filter button, which is nice and quite robust. However, my personal preference would be if you're already having the ability to sort this stuff down by personal folders, you should probably just go into a workflow. And then when you're in the workflow, you can go look at its executions. This one obviously hasn't been run yet, but you'll have a much easier time of saving you probably some clicks having to filter it out. Just go into the workflow and then look at the executions, which is scoped to just that particular workflow that you're working on. So that's two ways to get to the same thing, but just wanted to share a preference on that. Okay, so that will cover the majority of this. You can also filter sort this entire list right here by using the various filter options and search criteria that you have. So not impossible, but it does require on the front end that you know what's going on. And you should note that this is paginated. I don't remember. I think I changed it. Maybe it is 50. You can change it up to 100. It might come out of the box. I forget. I think I did change this. But in any event, whatever it's set to by default, these are your options as of the date of this recording in this version. Okay, so from here, this will cover just about everything except for this top right plus button. If we click on that, we see that we can create a workflow, a credential, and an enterprise. Now this works very similar to this button where we get the ability to create a workflow and credential. If I'm in personal, I still have the same three options, but the button does have that extra option of the folder. And notice that if you want to create a project, if you are on the enterprise only plan, not the community edition, whether you're self-hosted enterprise or you're in the cloud, this option for creating projects is under this button. So you will have to remember to go here to get to that feature. All right. The next and final piece is templates. Now this will open up a separate browser window and take you to the н8н website where you can filter search or search by category or scope of, what type of workflows are available for HR. Then from within there, you can sort through the plethora of items that's up there and go through all of that stuff. And these are really, really great. I'm just going to randomly pick one. This one's scraped LinkedIn for something, and the really cool thing is I can click to explore, so I can dig in. They have a really nice embedding in their support system as well as the template view, to where you can go in and with these notes, you can get a really great write-up, include documentation, because if we look at the flow itself, there's really not that much information in there. And so you have the ability to click into any one of these. I'll just double click, and now I can see the information that is inside of there. And you can get a feeling for how this works. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I haven't downloaded an entire template. I've simply just gone ahead and looked at this from an understanding standpoint to see how others are doing it or how it's configured. And you don't have to download it all. Now, if you do, another thing that I've done in the past is I have right-clicked on this when I've clicked into it, and you can choose to copy this workflow as it is. Here you can use for free, and you also have options to do that same copy function, and you can get started with the cloud. Obviously they recommend it that way, or you can elect to do your free self-hosted option, which is really a lot of what this course is about and not necessarily on the cloud, but you have those options available to you. Now with this taken onto the clipboard, I'm going to create a new workflow that's blank. I'm not going to do anything else, but I'm going to, on my clipboard, choose Control V or Command V on a Mac. I don't know on Linux if it's the same keyboard shortcut, but nonetheless, I'm going to paste that here. That is not what I copied, so that's quite interesting. So if I choose copy, what is it actually copying? I don't think it's copying anything. Okay, so good lesson learned. You want to go ahead and click use for free and copy template, and then come over here and Control V, Command V, whatever. And now as soon as you paste, you're probably going to want to click this button, which is zoom to fit. If you also type the number 1 on your keyboard, I'm using not the numerical keyboard, but I used the other key on that side. So if you're over here and you have a numerical keyboard, you just saw me, I pushed 1 on both use cases. So that does work. And then using the Control button, hold it down, or Command button. If you use the scroll wheel, you can scroll up and down. The other thing you can do is hold and press and hold the space bar, and watch my cursor. It goes from a pointy to a hand, but you have to hold the space bar down to see this. As long as I'm holding it, and now I left click and hold the mouse button, I can drag this around the canvas. So a combination of control and scrolling, and again, I'm holding the control down. I'm not just pressing it and then trying to scroll. You have to hold it down. Same thing with the space bar. The other thing you can do is hold the, if you just scroll up and down, you're going to get it to go up and down. If you want to scroll from left to right and you don't want to use the space bar to, pan, so to speak, you hold the shift key down, and if you scroll right, up and down, you'll scroll left and right. So that gives you a couple different ways of copying. Now, what's really cool is if you're in н8н and you're in this, if you have multiple browser windows open because you have multiple workflows, I can highlight these 3 items, and let me just come over here to localhost and get rid of that. We'll do, this is the one I want. I'll create another new workflow, and with those 3 items copied, I can move them around 2 different workflows. So I can open up one workflow, go into another workflow, and copy nodes in and out. I can even just copy this one node, and at this point, I could just, in the same area, paste it, and it pasted in here. Or I could come, let me get rid of the templates. I can come over here and repaste it, which showed up all the way at the top right. Anyway, I can paste it over there. And so those are the different opportunities that you have for the Canvas interface to just start using those templates. And those templates are very helpful because, again, you can copy the entire template. Once you got it in, you can move different parts of it and reconfigure it however you want. So templates are not only cool, but because of the way the н8н user interface is conducted, it makes life so much easier. So completely hats off to the н8н team for this. Very, very good. All right, so that covers the templates here. Now, variables, you're going to run into a little bit of an issue where we're going to leave without saving. You will get this note. You can't use it. You will have to upgrade to an enterprise plan to get to this feature. These are really, really cool. I'll show you something in context. Let me go into a blank workflow and show you how you might use that. So in a workflow, let's trigger this manually. I'm going to use a set, which is essentially how you get to creating a variable node. And to make it clear, instead of edit fields, that's what it's called. I think of them and refer to them as variables. So I'll just call this one var1. So that's pretty simple. I'll click in here to create a var1, my var, and then the string value, I'm going to come over here to expression. We're going to do double left pointing brackets so that we can get into the syntax to get into an expression. Now, if I come down here to execution and I click dot, actually, no, I'm sorry, it's not there. I don't use this because I'm not on the enterprise plan much, but the point, what I'm trying to show you is that you can reference the variables here within n8n, and I completely apologize because I did forget to how to get to these things. Execution item index parameter, today workflow, is it maybe under workflow? I remember seeing this, and there was a way of referencing the variables. So $vars dot. I will have to check the documentation. I'm sorry, I thought I remembered what this was. So we're going to leave without seeing, see more in the docs. So let's go over here and figure out how this works real quick so we can provide, okay, it was the .vars variable name. That's why it was giving me invalid syntax. I don't have the enterprise plan. So the key takeaway is that if you want to reference variables that you create globally, now the concept of variables globally is that I can use this in any workflow. So this is really, really cool. So I don't have to create these again and again and again per workflow, which is kind of a tedious pain in the you-know-what. But you can drag and drop these types of nodes anyway. And you did see that when I created a workflow, let me just do the set again. So we have this out. It'll just be floating. You can use this to create local variables to the workflow, but they're not global. They are scoped in the way that they are. So anyway, if you want to create a workaround, one of the things that you could do is you could build a workflow with a bunch of variables and a bunch of inputs. And so what you would do is in creating the API, if you saw the previous video where I did APIs, you could create an API of global variables and then just reference that as an endpoint and bring in your variable there. And that's how you could kind of rig up a global way of creating variables or create it inside of a spreadsheet or a list, depending on what the data type is that you're doing with the variable, and you could just make an API call filtering that variable name and then return the value for that. So a couple different creative ways to handle or get around having to pay for the variables under the cloud thing. So a couple different tricks there. Okay, so let's go back out of here and let's not save. Those are templates, those are variables. The rest of this stuff is under the help menu. And so we have quick start. This is for getting started and installing documentation. We've seen an example of that already because I couldn't remember, which as you saw was very, very helpful. And they've got these contextually placed strategic links or what it is that you saw when I was trying to get to variables. You saw learn more in the docs, and it takes you right to the area of the doc for the variable. So very, very nice for the team to have done that as well. There's a community forum that you can use for a multitude of reasons. They do have some free courses that they do offer online. And of course, you can report bugs for n8n as well as you saw me do this earlier. Click on n8n. You can find out what's going on, if there's a new version, yada, yada. And we'll leave that there. And then of course, from there, the other options are going to be under this ellipsis. Let me just refresh the screen to get into kind of a normal use case here. Now, under where your name is, you click the horizontal ellipsis, these three dots. You have the opportunity to sign yourself out or go into settings. So settings has its own huge area, and we'll cover this up, and we'll wrap up the UI UX interface for n8n in and of itself. Then we'll get into workflow, and that has its own interface, and there's almost unlimited combinations, so we're not going to go too crazy deep into that. All right, here is where you put your activation key. If you are on the community edition, they have the opportunity to register. This is how they can collect your information and possibly upsell you into a paid plan. But I do recommend that you do register for this and get an activation key because you do get a couple of extra plugs and features that come along with that registration. So helpful there. The other thing too is this is where you were to change your email and your information and your MFAs. And also I'm in the dark theme because my Windows is running dark. But if I want to, I can override it to the light theme. And this is what the user interface looks like on the white or light theme. If you want to change that and override it or do whatever under personal, again, you can change this back to system default or dark, which is one and the same for me. And then that's that. Okay. And I don't believe you can provide an avatar on the self-hosted version of it. So in any event, you get what you get. So under users, also, you're not going to be able to do much here because this is for a paid plan where you can invite other users, but you have to upgrade it to lock the ability to create additional admin users, which means that you could potentially collaborate on a particular workflow and things of that nature. But for the most part, I do recommend if you start getting into that use case, you're probably going to want to upgrade and get into a paid plan anyway. Here is where you can create an API key for n8n itself. Now, programmatically outside of n8n, and ironically, even into itself, you could use n8n to control itself. You might want to create or might need to create an API key. If you click on the word, it again contextually will take you into the documentation, telling you how to authenticate, any pagination of the results that come back, how to use the playground they have for the self-hosted version only, and they're very good in the documentation telling you which versions it's applicable to, when it is applicable to say or notate that this feature is limited to X. Okay, so that's very helpful for you there as well. The other thing here are external secrets. Again, secrets, if you're not familiar, are ways of storing your passwords and credentials to endpoints or other APIs. It's only available on the enterprise plan, and rightfully so. Most enterprises demand it, want it, need it, and so they appropriately have it scoped for where it needs to be. As community users or somebody running this on their machine, while security is of paramount, usually it's out of scope for most end users because it is a little bit more complicated than just typical normal stuff. Okay, here's where the environment's another thing where you can have multiple instances in different environments such as dev, prod, etc. This is also something scoped to enterprise. Highly suggest if you are in a business using this in a production use case scenario that you implement this and upgrade immediately to the enterprise plan, because between secrets and environments, and I'm not getting any money for this, although I am looking into becoming a partner to help people do implementations with this, but nonetheless, I do highly suggest that if you're in this scenario, strongly consider doing that. Along for the ride with the enterprise and all of those other features is going to come this other feature, or this feature. This is a way of authenticating into n8n as opposed to just using its built-in mechanism. You can do what's called SSO, aka acronym for single sign-on, and this is how you would configure it with Azure Active Directory, now called Entra ID. You might use single sign-on with Google. You might use single sign-on with any authentication authority that you have, including obviously Amazon's. So LDAP is another type of protocol for doing Active Directory type of integrations, authentications for more legacy companies that basically still have on-prem or cloud and data center / on-prem servers that they're using for authentication mechanisms. Log streaming, this also is available on the enterprise plan. This will allow you to log the information that's going on within it, and it's very, very helpful if you want to find out more information about all of that. Obviously, you can click here, it shows you how to set it up, what you can get, what you can not get. It's really, really good. If you're a company that is strong into governance and compliance, you should definitely consider this. And then, of course, this is the opportunity where everybody is going to use this on the non-enterprise or non-paid plans. This is for your self-hosted community edition. So recently in the news, there was this huge buzz about MCP from Anthropic. As of the date of this recording in April, MCP's kind of stabilized, and N8N themselves have created their own MCP plugin. So I use that as an example because it's recent and comes to mind, but also there are other nodes that people make in the community, and if you need to install one of that, this is where you'll come to do it. You'll install the community node in your package and acknowledge that, hey, listen, this could be really bad if somebody writes some nefarious code, and you insert it into your system, and maybe they put a listener or an ear, and they're grabbing all of your data. So, if you have the ability to understand and read the code, I highly suggest you go through the code before you just install a community node, or at least get feedback or ask the community, hey, is this thing safe? Have you used it? Have you experienced any whatever? And maybe they'll be able to help you along with that. And it's a really great community out there online. So be sure to check all of that out. All right, so we've covered all of the settings and why and where and all of the other stuff. The final thing to do is to get into is workflows. You've seen this to date, so I will very quickly now just wrap this up, because from here we're going to get into the weeds as we do examples and more examples. We're going to see more and more of this, so I don't want to spend too much time here. You've got all of the stuff still available in the left sidebar. Inside of the workflow, though, we do have this optional horizontal, kind of hidden drop-down menu, and this allows you to duplicate the workflow that you're working in. Another really cool feature is you saw me copy and paste a workflow earlier, and when you copy and paste, what it does is it puts a bunch of JSON on the clipboard and then allows you to paste interchangeably between it. So instead of pasting that workflow that you saw me do from the templates earlier, if I went into Visual Studio Code, created a file named foo, or foobar or whatever, .json, and then paste it in the code. It's just JSON code, and then I can put it on Git. I can upload it to wherever I want to put it for safekeeping. Or you can come over here after you've created it and just choose download, and it'll download that JSON file. You may need to rename it if you want, but anyway. You can also import from a specific URL, which is very helpful. It could be Git, it could be any number of places, or you could just download that file. Maybe you previously downloaded, or a colleague has downloaded, or somebody uploaded and you downloaded. Either way. All of these are JSON file formats and multiple ways of copying and pasting and downloading and importing from various areas to do. So that's what all of this stuff is as well. Now, the other thing that is available here are, let me go ahead and create, trigger manually, we'll do set. Again, because I don't want to spend much time in any of this to go too far, we'll leave this as such. I'll click save to make sure that I save it out because I want to get to these other areas. Okay, everything that we discussed before is still here. The publish to Git option is not lit up because we haven't configured it. Now, we are in the scope of the context of the workflow itself, and there are settings at two levels. A, at N8N, you saw me talk about this earlier in the same video, but in the workflow itself, there's additional settings. These are the setting options that's available to you. Any of them have a question mark over them. You can hover over the question mark to get more details, but basically the execution order, V1 recommended. If you want to know more about how they did it, it's almost like merchandising in retail. They go from top to left to right, top to bottom. So as you create stuff on the canvas, right, like you see here, this is linear. But what if I had something like, this, where it was split, and I had a line that goes from the top, from here, and then I got other stuff out to the, imagine I had stuff out to the right, and same thing down here, I have another option. So what typically happens is left to right, top to bottom. So the topmost node will run, and it'll go all the way out to the left. to the right, and then it goes to the next row, and so on and so forth. And if you have multiple rows and multiple things stacked up, it's going to execute in that format. So if you're wondering why it's doing what it's doing, that's why it's doing it. And it's all because of this execution order. You can go back to a legacy model. Obviously, the version 1 is recommended. I also recommend you just leave it there and understand and design your flows accordingly. All right, error workflow. This is really, really cool. You can create a single workflow to handle all errors inside of n8n, which means, if you don't configure it, by default, it shows no workflow. So if you want to configure it to when the workflow throws an error, maybe you want to get an email notification or handle it in some way, you can create another workflow, save it, and then here from the dropdown, you will choose any number of other workflows that's out there. Now, obviously, none of these have anything to do with errors because I didn't create one, but you could create one and do it there. This is just for a learning lab, so I don't have one. In production, I absolutely would. And the other thing, too, is when this thing executes, what time zone is this thing going to execute on? Obviously, universal time code is going to be helpful. But for me, the default is going to be New York because I am East Coast US. You need to change this to whatever you want. Also, when you use datetime functions, it's going to rely on this setting as well. So make sure that you know that it's there and it's on a per workflow basis. Okay, the other thing is saved failed production executions. This will save those. If you don't want to deal with them, you don't want to fill up the logs, you choose do not save. Same thing with successful and manual executions. All of those settings are one and the same, as well as save execution progress. These are by default, they do not save. Okay, here is something interesting. By default, the timeout workflow is not set, which means this thing will just run indefinitely. And if you have a bunch of really bad workflows or a bunch of process-driven workflows that require, say, somebody to authorize or approve or whatever, they're going to just stay running all the time. And you're then going to have to go out to your executions. I showed you earlier where to go to get the global executions. And then you have to filter on those that are still waiting or pending or not completed. And then you'll have to delete them out manually. And the way to avoid that is to simply set the timeout workflow to die in X number of hours, minutes, and seconds. You have that granular configuration. Now, this is really cool. I'll show you later in the administrative section how to plunder into the database. By default, it's going to use the SQLite database. And then you have the opportunity to use, if you so choose, Postgres, which is... There's all kind. We'll get into all of that later, but nonetheless, if you know that it took somebody 8 hours to complete a process, a workflow, and you know that to be true, just put 8. Well, actually, you have to do 8. This is number of minutes, so you'll have to do 60 times 8. 6 times 8 is 48. So add to 0, 480, which would represent 8 hours of production execution. And so this is the time that's saved, right? And so over time, you can aggregate on this, create a report to senior leadership and management showing them how effective n8n is, how much of a benefit it's been to their business, so on and so forth. It'll make you look really good, trust me. So if you can remember to fill this out, definitely go ahead and do this because you're going to get a lot of mileage. Now, it's not that clean. It does store nested in a column in the database as a JSON. So you have to use a very specific function, but I already have that written for you. I'll simply just drag and drop it. You can use it in any way you see fit, but I've got the SQL for both SQLite, and it does vary pretty decently between platforms of Postgres and SQL. So I'll show you that SQL statement. So stay tuned or just skip ahead to the end where in the administration section, I start talking about SQL and databases and things of that nature. All right, well, that is it for this interface and this usability. Obviously, you can click into this to get into the workflow history. I didn't cover that button there, but the other thing I didn't cover, and I'm not going to go too deep into the woods, is this talks about all the Git, takes you into the GitHub. So if you ever need to get there for whatever reason, and then this just keeps a running count of all of the different votes and things of that nature. So, all right, that should cover just about everything. Oh, I didn't mention tags. So tags are very important because tags will help you find and categorize your workflows. It is optional, but if you have tags, use them, please, because when you try to filter sort, it'll be absolutely helpful for you when you're trying to use those filter functions. If you need more granularity or specificity on trying to figure out what was created, how to find whatever, maybe you want to put it in folders or whatever the case may be, but tags are a real good way of helping you find stuff later when this thing gets unwieldy out of control with a whole bunch of workflows that you have in your system. Okay, that's it for this video, guys. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Welcome back to another video, and we're going to get into the application events. They come in two flavors, and we're going to talk about triggers and actions, and I promise this one will be probably one of my quicker videos. All right, so to get started with this really quick, every time we add a node, we're simply starting off with a trigger. Now, I've been using manually trigger. I think I use webhook, and I haven't got into the on-chat message. Again, there's other ways. This is more n8n specific. This is probably a good video to look at these. I'm not going to go into these at any depth right now. These are email, errors, local files, MCP server triggers, n8n itself, and an SSE, which actually has to do with a subset of the MCP server. So these are triggers, and let's talk about triggers and actions and what each one is. So a trigger is something that triggers your workflow to go. Think of a gun gun. Even if you don't like a gun, at least hopefully you understand it. The trigger is what makes the gun fire and go bang. And so a trigger in a workflow is what makes it fire and do something. Now, when we're talking about it doing something, now we're talking about the other word. I said we're going to talk about triggers, and we're going to talk about actions. And so going back to the opening thing, that's the trigger and the action. So the trigger makes the workflow fire off and to do something, but the work of what it's doing, those in fact are the actions. And we can see this in N8N in a couple of different ways. Let's pull open the SQL Server so you can see a rare example. This isn't, I say rare because most of the nodes, especially the application nodes that you're going to use, and SQL Server is one of them. So if I use Microsoft SQL, there are actions, but there are no triggers. You can see no Microsoft SQL triggers available. Users often combine, and the thing is, when there isn't any trigger to choose, it will suggest some triggers, and it's saying, hey, listen, users normally use a webhook call. And the reason for it is because, as you saw when I did what I did earlier with the API, it creates an API in the fact that it can create, update, and delete data in a SQL Server database. So using those combinations together, we now can make a quick webhook/or API. And so it doesn't have a trigger, but we can use other events in N8N to make our workflows do whatever we want to do. Another trigger could be Google Sheets. So let's look at Google Sheets. All right, so now we have 3 triggers for Google Sheets, and we have 10 actions. So because we're just starting off our workflow, we can trigger this workflow specifically around a Google Sheet. So when a row is added in the sheet, then this workflow can fire off and do something. Maybe you want to be notified. That's a very simple use case, or maybe you want to make sure that you copy data. Maybe you have a security setup to where you only want your public website to write the data to something that is not mission critical to the business, where you don't want any line happening, but you're using a makeshift Google account, and that makeshift Google account, you really don't care, God forbid, if it were to get hacked or whatever the case may be. It's just a relay. It's a temporary place to put data, and then the real security is going to be here because you're going to trigger on N8N to, when a row is added, to go through, copy the data, put it into a SQL Server inside of the organization or the company, and then circle back and delete it, because if it were to get hacked, you don't even want people to get anything because you're simply just storing data in a Google Sheet as means, again, of temporarily just getting to something. So hopefully that's a good use case for you to think of and put your mind's eye around. There's literally, the sky's the limit, endless use cases, okay? And so here's where, after we trigger on a row add, now we can circle back and we can say, hey, listen, what are we going to do with this? We can append a row, do whatever, but now what we want to do is get a row in a sheet. But on row add may trigger from this anyway, and it'll trigger on the row. So some nodes will do as expected, other nodes won't do as expected. So if the expectation is that this trigger will have data in it about the row and all of the columns that were added for that row, then you're good to go there. Otherwise, if it doesn't, let me go back to sheet. Otherwise, you may have to run a second operation to get rows in the sheet, and maybe you want to just get the last row of the first row because that would be the row that was triggered on. One of the things you may get is in the trigger, it will only give you the row ID or the transaction ID, or maybe it's unique to the workflow, and then you just have to simply pass in to get the row. You only want one row. Just pass in the row ID or the record ID or whatever it is, and the point is you can do multiple steps. I don't know that Google Sheets per se does this. It's almost like when you do it, you just kind of intrinsically know because you've dealt with it enough, but just know that some of these actions and triggers for some of these aren't as intuitive or as easy as you might think it is. You have to circle back and do this really extra stuff. Coming from Power Automate, I ran into that so much. I think N8N is a much better use case or usability than Power Automate. I love Power Automate for the last 10 years. I still use it quite a bit, but man, if I don't have to use it for licensing and performance and all of the really crazy nuances, I prefer to use, well, before this, I also used to prefer to use make.com, which was Integromat back in the day, but this is almost identical to that. And even before that, I think, what was the other one? Zapier is another one that's out there that's really, really popular and really cool. But in any event, that is it for this video. So I told you it would be one of the shorter ones. It's a little, almost 7 minutes long, but those are the takeaways. These are the triggers. These are the actions. And hopefully I walked you through verbally some of the use cases in how these actions and triggers work hand in hand and how you can make better workflows. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Bye. Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to talk about inputs and outputs. And this is a very simple thing to discuss and deal with. However, there are nuances, and this is where people can get really confused and maybe spun around a little bit on something that otherwise should be fairly straightforward. So let's dig into this and try to take the simplistic path forward so you don't overthink it, and then we can expand and just show the additional information as it is presented. So if you haven't seen the previous video where we go over the user interface, it's really important to do that now if you haven't done it, or minimally, I'm going to pick this manual trigger. I'm going to go into this configurations because one of the things I discussed earlier, or at least the point that I want you to see, let me go ahead and add another node here so that I can make this point a little bit better. I'm going to add my Microsoft SQL Server node. We'll execute a query. All right, so this is what I wanted to illustrate earlier. Let me add one more node after the fact here. Let's add a set node so we can do this properly. Okay. So one of the things that I discussed to you in the last video, and this is important, or at least the one takeaway that I want to carry over into this video, is when you are off of the canvas, okay? So this is the canvas. When you click into any one of these nodes, you can configure the node, and you do so by configuring it in the middle. Now, the most simplistic whole takeaway from this video is on the left, there's inputs, and on the right, there are outputs. And I wish it was just as simple as that, and we can call it the end of the video and move on. However, in order to avoid having to go back to the canvas, click on the node, back to the canvas, click on the other node, you can simply stay in this configuration setting and simply scroll through the nodes by hovering right and left, and you can go to the left and to the right. Now, this does require you, this is an extremely simple flow, but if I had like 50 nodes on here with branching and left and right, it's probably much easier to go back to the canvas and click on the node, because unless all your nodes are, all your ducks are in a row, so to speak, it's going to be really easy for you to get spun around in a larger workflow. But simplistic workflows, they do work like this, and there are use cases to where it's very beneficial to just stay in this detailed view so that you can move around. Okay, now this is where things start to get a little crazy. Let me go ahead and execute this. I'm going to go one step back to go one step forward. Under the edit credentials to your SQL account, notice that you can have a query. So I'm going to do select star from customers and hit test setup, and I get a response. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm getting all rows from the customers table, and this is the one step back. Some of you may be wondering, why did I, or how do I specify the database? If I know that this is the table, how do I specify the database? And you do that in the connection setting. So if you need to connect to the customers table and the inventory table and the products table, you're going to need to create multiple connections to those SQL Server, because the connection is simply just allowing you to connect to a particular or singular database. So if you are trying to get data out of another database, you're going to have another account. And so one of the things you could do is MSSQL-lab. That means you know that this is the credentials for the lab. And I'm not going to go yet another step forward, but I will make a call out. Some of you may be seeing this and not understanding what this is. So I'm running н8н in Docker, and I have SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, the community edition or the developer edition, I forget which one, running on my local machine, the same where I have Docker desktop running. And as a result of that, in order to get to your otherwise local host, you simply just use host.docker.internal. So a little quick side tip for the Microsoft node, even though we're not dealing with vendor or software nodes, just a quick aside so that at least people don't get spun around in their head trying to figure out how this stuff's working. Okay, the other thing I want to show you is either whether you're on the left looking where you have inputs, or whether you're on the right where you have outputs, notice that you have table, JSON, and schema. Over here, table, JSON, and schema, okay? And this is where people really do get confused, and I'm going to pop over into the edit node to illustrate this. So let me just do email, if I could spell. The easiest way, this is my preferred way, I don't want to coach you into using it any one particular way. I encourage you to try your own. I found it much easier and cleaner and more English to use it in this context. So I can drag customer email out over and do it like that. And that will now get me the email where this is just CS Acme, okay? And so it's really easy to use in that manner. Now, if I go over to the JSON, I can do the same thing. I can highlight, you see this block showing up over here. Now I have not just one, but I can pick any one record and pop it over here. However, I do want to call out, and this will be a good place for a segue. If I click test, I'm still getting CS Acme. And if I climb up here, CS Acme is the first record in the list, even though I dragged and specifically chose record 6. And the reason I'm calling this out is because I want to set expectations. If you think you're going to get the 6th record email by simply dragging the 6th record email into the box, and you're expecting to get contactvisionaryltd.com, that is not going to happen. I want you to take a look at the output. You see this, and this is going to burn you. It burns me. So be careful when you're dealing with nodes. Here's 50 items. Also, here's 50 items. So н8н will process things in each type of node. Certain nodes, like this node, is going to see that you're passing in a table of data, and it's going to process a table of data. So I'm going to get a new table of data, but I'm going to get a table of data with just 50 emails. And you can see this is, if I do all, I got all 50 emails here, and it's essentially now no longer a table. It's more like a list. And that's fine. And then if I want the 6th email from here, then unfortunately I have a couple of options. Number one, I can come over here to use the filter. And from the filter, now this is how most of you would do this. And you're going to come over to, again, I prefer the schema again because it's so much easier. And we'll just do test setup. And now all of a sudden you see I kept one item and I discarded 49 items, right? And so this is really good because I got rid of the list and I got to just the one that I was looking for. And so this is more of a user-friendly way of taking information in, using the information on the out, And then hopefully this gives you some information about the table or versus JSON. And if we look at the output on this, we have table. And at this point, don't get confused, because no longer do you technically you do have a table. You have a single row in a table. And if you go back to the JSON class that we talked about, I want you to imagine a opening and closing square bracket, and then a set of curly braces, and then a key value of key being email, the value being this contact at visionaryltd.com. So in JSON, that's essentially all it looks like. And so this is exactly what I verbally just described. Here's the visual representation of that. And you can see that it's not a record. It's not just a key value. It's not just one item. It is a table still of data. And so that is what it is. And here's your schema, again, that you can see over there. So all of this is relative the same, but typically, what I do is I use the schema. Now, the other thing I want to show and talk about in this, make sure that I am on the last one. It is so important to name your nodes. So for example, here I have a node name, Microsoft SQL, okay? See that, the way that this is? I'm gonna bounce out of here and go back to the canvas and go back into the filter. I'm gonna twirl all of these so they're closed so we don't get distracted. Each one of these is the name of the node. So I don't know if you noticed this or not, but here's that Microsoft SQL. And so everything in here is referenceable to this, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, let me do a new set node. Because the other thing that you absolutely need to understand, and this is for expression. So if you have no plan on writing expressions, you can ignore me for now. Eventually, you're going to need to use an expression, whether you realize it or not, because the act of simply dragging and dropping information, see this where I have JSON email and it's talking about the CS Acme, it's referring to this node called edit field. Even though I'm over here, I've got edit fields and I have edit fields 1. This is just the other edit fields. And so now I've got two edit fields that are almost identical. It gets really confusing really fast. So you need to make sure that you're using good naming conventions. And the other reason that it matters is because now if I just say, I don't know, my email, right? But I want to grab this email from the last, I don't know, the first item. And I want you to see what happens here. Let's just grab this email. So this email is coming from the edit fields email, okay? I want you to look at the code that н8н writes for you. It gives a $sign in parentheses, and then you get a set of single quotes, and notice the name of the node appears within the parentheses of this bracket. So if you just focus on just that part, and I'm going to delete this for just a quick second, and forget about all of that, this is simply just referring to the node. So I want you to think of this syntax right here, only the syntax, as the node itself. н8н, when you're brand new, this will get really confusing, but this is a golden moment of takeaway for information. You got to get this clear in your head. The very last node that you have that you're dragging out, so the last node in series. So I'm on edit fields 1. I'm just going to call this my bar so that we have more clean names. Whoops. And I'm going to go back to the canvas. I'm going to do edit fields. Let's change the name of this one to list of emails. So now we have more or better English going on here. So now we have list of emails. This one is simply just called filter, and that's the previous one. All right, the thing I wanted to show you here, once again, let me drag this over. See, the name of the node comes through. We have a list of emails, and it says it can't determine which item to use because it doesn't know which singular item to grab from, because I'm pulling in a list of 50 items, and this is simply just holding a singular item. And the reason for it is the input, the last item, is a single item, and it makes a huge difference. So if I'm trying to pull in a new list, or if I'm trying to set a singular value from an item in a list, that's not going to work. I can pull this one in, but watch what happens when I do this. All of a sudden, I don't get the name anymore. I just get this $sign JSON. So I'm going to illustrate this here. This is the node before the node I'm working with. This node can be referred to one of two ways. I'm going to change the filter node to foo, so we have some funny name that stands out in our mind's eye. Okay, so when I'm working with this, the last node before the node you're working with is always $sign JSON. And I almost wish that н8н would completely do away with it. In my opinion, it's almost to a detriment that it sets you up for failure. And the reason for that is that, in my opinion, they should always use the name of the node. So I'm going to go into this expression right here. Let's get rid of this, and let's refer to it by the node name. So I don't know if you remember that or not, but it's $sign. And then IntelliSense is helping you out here. I don't have to type in the parentheses, the comma, and then the name foo. I can just come down here and auto-select it. And then I can use the dot syntax to work my way through. The suggested item on the top is always helpful. And we choose item, and then we do dot, JSON, dot, and then eventually we get to the email. And so now I can grab that email out. The reason this is important to use the name of the node and not the cheap, easy way out, which is that $sign variation of it, which н8н does for you to be helpful, and it's all well and good, but this is the use case that's going to happen to you. All of a sudden, your workflow is working good, and life is grand. I'll just save it as is, right? And we'll run the workflow, and life is good. Now, I am going to disconnect this node. And we'll disconnect it here. We'll disconnect it here. We'll disconnect this here. list of emails. See, I'm using JSON here. And let's change the order of these. So now we've got this one, now we've got this one. This is probably a really poor example, but if I test the workflow, all of a sudden this node doesn't work. It doesn't understand what's happening here. Even though I'm getting, a foo, the problem here is that the filter doesn't understand what's going on. It's completely lost. And its reason it's lost because that node, even though it's in the workflow, the JSON in this use case is referring to this node. And I wasn't originally referring to this node. I was referring to this node. And so this one's also using JSON. And because each block, when you use it, always uses the $JSON, it's always referring to the node before. So the key takeaway is, let me see if I can do a couple of levels of undo here. I don't know how many levels it's going to let me do. Let's run this out, okay? So we're back. Rather than just go with the default, the way that this is, I would highly suggest, even though it's so easy to drag and drop, it really does make it easy. But the problem with that is you're going to burn yourself in the event that you ever shuffle nodes around. So the painful, not too painful, but almost more painful way is to use the IntelliSense, even though it's right there, just refer to the node by itself. Now, unfortunately, I've got to dig through a couple of extra items to get to the email. Of course, I picked the wrong one. And now I'm safe. I have the freedom to break these nodes, move them around, because if you refer to each node as the node's true name and not the cheap, easy, quick win of $JSON, then you can not burn yourself and break your flows down the road. And this is especially important if you're working in a collaborative environment or session, because some people might follow these practices, other people may not. And as a result of this, you're going to wind up with all kinds of a mess on your hands. So like I said, innocently, inputs and outputs, you might have thought that this is just as simple as it is. And I guess argumentatively speaking, it is as simple as this. But again, there's so many little nuances in here, or the snake is in the grass just ready to bite you, that if you're not familiar with this, all these little nuances of, again, the table, JSON, and whatever, the ability to drag and drop, in ignorance, if you think you're in a list and dragging the fifth item, that's going to work. Using the $JSON as opposed to using the names, not understanding that the names of the nodes are extremely important because you refer to them in code downstream. Like, these are the summarization of all of the little getcha-gotchas that at least I need you to remember in this, because by taking the time here in this unfortunate longer video that should have been 5 minutes, is that you're going to save yourself countless of hours of debugging, pinning items, and troubleshooting, because I don't know how many times you're going to find yourself burning yourself over this $JSON. So anyway, I have milked this one literally for all it's worth. There's only one last thing that I think I probably should mention to you, and that is there are nodes for skill levels. I think you might have noticed that I had a list of 50 items and I was trying to filter it out here. Well, all of this is absolutely unnecessary. I can completely remove all of this, and if I come over to here, I think we were dealing with this. If I just know a little bit more skill by doing a where, I can use all of that filtering functionality within the SQL statement. And I can even make it dynamic. So I can say where, and then at this point, I can come in with my mustache braces, one too many. And at this point, I could have grabbed something from an input field. If I do $, anyway, you see, I can list this out, and I can go in and grab whatever is there, and I could make this SQL statement a dynamic SQL statement, whereas you saw I just hard-coded it before. But the point is, if you don't have this skill, there are data transformation nodes that we're going to go through all of these, and you saw me use one of them in an example here, a filter. So the good news is, there's always a node for you to work around or work through something. It might be a little bit uglier, and more advanced people might look at your flow and say, this is completely unnecessary, and have an elitist attitude on it. But you know what? Unless it chokes up your flow, most flows, at least for beginners, they typically don't have really insanely long runtimes. Infinite loops are not the same problem that you run into in traditional programming, so the overhead might be a little higher. At scale, then it could potentially be a problem. Or if you have a bunch of work showing up in n8n and you have a bunch of workflows, like I do have quite a bit of workflows here, so that if I'm in the overview section, I don't know how many I got, but there's enough. And as a result of this, it will slow your server down over time. So I'm not advocating for you to make perfect all of the time, but at least be mindful to, always try to scale up as much as you can, even though n8n makes it so easy. Don't use it for complacency to just, kind of make really bad workflows for the sake of it. Always try to improve them. Use as little nodes as possible when you can, and push yourself to have new skills to constantly learn how to do it with less nodes. I make that lifelong challenge for you in n8n. All right, that's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.